So just to introduce myself, my name is Graham McCauley and I kind of head up our technology strand within the Trust. With me, I've got Rachel and Cheryl who will introduce themselves later. But just to give you a kind of a background to say that they've joined the team very recently, having worked in the Trust and having worked in education, and have been thrown in massively at the deep end in all of this, like I'm sure we all have. So hopefully what we're aiming to do over the next hour and a half or so is just to share our approach to distance learning. Not to say that this is the only approach or indeed the correct approach, but is kind of some of our thinking. And we really hope that you'll be able to take some of the ideas away back to your schools, and other ideas probably perhaps they won't work for your context. But hopefully we'll be able to give it something that is useful for everybody. Just to follow up to Aziz's point about Twitter handles, we've also put ours on there. So if there was something that you wanted to follow up with us about a specific thing, please definitely do reach out and do ask. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? Everyone sort of working together to make sure that we deliver the best possible outcomes for all of our children. So just next slide, please, Rachel. And just to echo Aziz's sentiments, to say, I don't know if you're anything like me, the calendar has never been so busy, and I've never had so many meetings ever. So thank you for coming today and for taking out some time in your day when I know everyone has got 101 things to do. So thank you from all of us for that. Next slide. So I just want to, if I may, just go through what we're going to cover over the next while. So I'm going to provide you a bit of an overview of the Trust, because I think probably one of our key messages for today is to say that this isn't all about COVID-19 response. For us, it's been a lot about all of the great practice that we had in place prior to COVID-19 and how we've taken that and adapted it to the situation, and how it performs. So it sits within our wider Trust 5-year strategy. I just wanted to then move on and share some of the challenges that we face pre-COVID-19, and hopefully they'll resonate with you, and they will be similar to some of the challenges that I'm sure your schools and colleges and organisations are facing. Then going to move on and share a little bit about what we've done to overcome this, so some of the thinking behind our rationale and our approach. And then we'll look into how we took our strategy and how we tweaked it to ensure that we could provide the best quality remote teaching that we could do, given all of the challenges and the circumstances and the uncertainty that is facing schools at the moment. And then we'll give, so Rachel and Cheryl will come in and share with you some simple examples that we thought perhaps would be useful, because we wanted to provide you with the balance of that long-term strategic thinking we've been doing, but also the kind of short-term, what could I do next week as a starter to provide this remote teaching? And it might be a lot of this is already in place for a lot of your schools. It might be you have alternative solutions. So they're just some sort of ideas. And then we'll sort of wrap it up by thinking what some of the next steps could be in terms of some of the thinking that we know is coming out of the DfE in terms of the use of technology. And then Aziz is coming in and support us to have a conversation about what we can take back to our schools. So hopefully that will provide an overview. But as Aziz said, please do jump in the chat and make a comment. And it might be actually that it's not necessarily picked up then, but when we come to the kind of 3 sections we put in place to have a discussion, we can then follow those up and have a discussion. And I think we're all, Rachel, Cheryl, myself, we're all very keen for this to be a two-way process where we all give and we all kind of learn from that. I hope that's okay. Just next slide, Rachel. Super. Excellent. So just to give you a bit of an overview of the Trust, we're 6 schools spread across 7 sites. They're all primary provision. We have just over 3,500 pupils, although interestingly, something that we've noticed is that our admissions are increasing as a result of our COVID-19 response. We've noticed a lot of children coming in, applying for spaces in our schools from local schools, which wasn't something we expected, and is really an interesting conversation there. We employed just over 400 staff across those sites. But most importantly for me is to say that over the last 4 years, we've been on a journey. And I would say we're halfway up a very, very steep mountain. It hasn't been all up, it hasn't been all positives. But I think what has really helped us as an organisation is that we spent time forming this strategy, and we spent time getting staff on board. We worked with our key stakeholders. We worked with the local community, our trust board, governing bodies, to form our kind of approach to digital technology. And I think in terms of COVID-19, this has been essential to what we've done, because we already had our thinking in place. We already had our systems, our processes. I had my vision of how I felt technology should be used in the classroom. And so when we come on to some of the more practical things, I think it's really important that sort of just to remember that this hasn't happened overnight, and we were in a very fortunate place that we've done a lot of strategic thinking around this topic before COVID-19 approached us. Next slide, Rachel. Oh, just let someone in. So just to talk about some of the challenges, and I'm sure these were some of the challenges or are some of the challenges that you're facing. So we were very aware that school funding was changing. And it is very important to us that whatever we did with technology to support teaching had to be not only affordable at the time, but it also had to be affordable in a sustainable manner. And so it's really important to us that we had to be able to provide a solution to a problem that would be suitable for years to come. When we began to think about our digital transformation and how we can take schools that were in a really good place and make them even better still. This was at the time of GDPR implications. And I think, if I'm honest, there was quite a lot of scaremongering and uncertainty about, can you put a name on an exercise book? Can you even refer to a child by their name and all these things? And I think when we were looking at our digital transformation, it was really important to us. Whatever we did, we had to make sure it was also legally sound going forward. And so that was part of it. I don't come from a technical background. I used to be a class teacher, and I used to have a class a few years ago in year 6. And so I don't really want to dwell on this point, but there were some technical changes happening in the local authority. So some of the services that we buy from the local authority were being disbanded. And to be honest, we didn't really get an awful lot of notice about that. And so this was kind of the instigator of it all, that kind of got us to think we need to think differently about it. But I guess more important than that was to say that we had 400 staff across 7 sites that wanted to collaborate, that wanted to work together. And whereas IT was an enabler, at the time it was actually blocking lots of our kind of dreams and our aspirations. So staff wanted to be able to work together to develop teaching and learning. They wanted to be able to share resources. They wanted to be able to collaborate. But our idea of collaboration at the time was just email a document, and if you get it back with a reply, then great. If you don't, then you don't. And so we really needed to look at how we could collaborate in a really meaningful, purposeful manner. And finally, our biggest struggle, and I realised this very quickly from my interview and then since working for the Trust, that there was no direction for technology. There was no vision of what we wanted to achieve. Our approach was very much about, we just replaced like-for-like equipment. So if a computer went wrong, we just replaced it with a new computer. There was no vision, strategy, direction behind it. And I think more worryingly for me is that our technology decisions were being made and being driven by the kind of technical side of it. At no point was pedagogy, pupil impact, school improvement a consideration. And I think when I joined the team, one of the things I was very keen from the outset was to say that our digital strategy, our technology adoption needs to be driven by the classroom, needs to be driven by what practitioners like myself in the classroom were doing with technology. And that was quite a shock for us, and that was quite a hard message to deliver, because I think a lot of schools were in a very similar place to us, and I think at no point had pedagogy and technology necessarily come together. So that was the position we were in. So how do we overcome that? Next slide, Rachel. So very early on, we had to make an important decision, and that important decision was, do we continue doing what we've always done, i.e. do we get the polyfiller out, do we fill the holes, do we paint over it, and do we pretend it never happened and kind of move on, cover up the gaps, or do we think differently? Do we realise that technology is changing, the way we use tech in society, in the workplace is changing, and perhaps that needed to change in our schools? Next slide, Rachel. And of course, it's really easy for me to say that we innovated, but actually, I think one of the big challenges we had to overcome was that you've got to be quite bold to innovate. And I don't just mean innovate in technology, I mean innovate in everything we do. Because if we go back to the polyfiller approach, it's very easy for us to fill the holes, paint over them, low cost, low risk, low CPD required. In fact, probably no CPD required. We just ship some out and ship some in. Staff morale is probably maintained, and that's really important, I think, at the moment in schools. Wellbeing is maintained. As far as staff are concerned, they've had an upgrade. But versus innovation. It can be very costly in terms of time and in terms of money. Being innovative can be risky, and we'll come on later to talk about our schools where we're all fairly high attaining, and one of the challenges for us is about sort of how do we, you know, why would we innovate when all of our schools are good or outstanding and all of our results are significantly above national averages? So there's a risk there. I think, you know, I'm sure we're all in agreement that changing things causes anxiety, and schools are ever changing places. Is this another change that we need or perhaps don't need? And of course, mindsets are crucial. And how do as an organization, how do we change staff mindset whilst maintaining the great schools that we already have in place? So next slide, Rachel. So for me, it was really important I shared with our stakeholders what it was I wanted to achieve. And I felt strongly that there were 4 areas that our technology approach in school had to cover. It had to be, number one, easy of use for pupils. So technology for me had to enable us to develop our pedagogy and deliver great teaching and learning for every learner. And that was sort of a non-negotiable. Whatever happened, children couldn't suffer as a result of this. Financial implications, it had to be sustainable. Technically, it just had to work. And I think historically that was not a case in some of our schools. And because of the IT failing on us and because of our strategy not being in place, actually the technology hindered children's learning rather than being a benefit. And finally, it had to be flexible. So we had to recognise that whilst we had a vision of what teaching might look like now, we had ideas what that might look like in 5 years' time. But fundamentally, that was going to change. And we had to be able to kind of reflect and adapt our approach to teaching and learning based on the future. Just next slide, Rachel. And so the key was to form a strategy, and we spent a lot of time doing this. And at the time, I thought this was quite painful, and I thought that this was a rather long process, and I thought that we could accelerate it. And with hindsight, I'm really glad that we spent a lot of time forming our strategy, because we spent a lot of time engaging with our trust board, our governors, our staff, our senior leadership teams, our digital leaders, our pupils. And I think because we spent almost 2 years forming this strategy and getting people on board and shaping it and scoping our strategy, it meant that when we came to implement some of the changes to raise the standards in our schools, to develop the quality of education, we'd had some of those hard conversations. We'd had those challenges and those kind of questions. And I think it meant that then it kind of made it easier down the line. Although I must be honest, at the time, I didn't think that at all. But now I sort of sometimes reap the rewards from that, from those conversations. Next slide, Rachel. So I thought it'd be useful just to kind of share our adoption model, partly in terms of technology, but partly I think this is a model that we've used across the trust for lots of different change management projects. And that's to say, firstly, we started really small. We fixed some of the problems we were having, centered around collaboration and staff being able to work with each other across sites. And there you know, we didn't do anything radical. We just enhanced our existing provision to sort of almost get some of those quick wins. I think once we'd started small and we'd kind of got the adoption occurring, we kind of ran in different directions based on what staff wanted. So I very much saw my role as empowering staff to provide them with solutions to problems. And so if assessment was it's a challenge in one of our schools, that was how we supported them. If workload was an issue in another school, that was something we supported. And as a result of that, the way we used technology did develop, and it helped people provide problems. And I think once we'd done a lot of those, perhaps, dare I say, quick and easy wins, we started to get to and we're at the point we're at now, which is the most exciting bit, which is about how are we really influencing pedagogical change? So how are we using technology to change the way we teach? And in many ways, COVID-19 has massively escalated that, and it's made it become a real driving force within the trust to make sure that we can provide the best quality teaching and learning for all of our children. Next slide, Rachel. So just before I move on, I just wanted to share some of the other challenges we had and some of the obstacles that we had to overcome, because it'd be very easy to share our story and think that it was plain sailing when it wasn't. There were problems we had to overcome. So as I think I alluded to, all of our schools were Ofsted good or outstanding. All of them had massively high attaining results, all well above national average. And for many onlookers, there was a risk there that actually our schools are doing fantastically. 5 out of the 6 schools were in the top 10 in the local authority. You know, we're in a financial position where the reserves are strong. What, you know, why do we kind of risk all of that? So that was an obstacle we had to overcome for all of our stakeholders. That I think the pace that we deliver change in schools is often a challenge, and I think schools are changing places, whether it's your curriculum, whether it's your staff structure, whether it's your approach to curriculum delivery, whether it's your sort of performance management and school improvement processes. One of the obstacles was, how do we manage the change? And I think one of the challenges that I found in a MAP perspective was that different schools wanted to move at different pace. And whilst that was great and we needed to do that, we also needed to maintain a general speed that we progress with matters, so that all of the schools kind of got the same experience. And that was really difficult, to really get into the schools and into their DNA to understand how they work as an organisation. At the same time as all of this, we were conducting staff restructures in some of our schools, and as a result of that, there were staff redundancies. So we had to be very mindful that any considerable capital investment was also in the context of staff being made redundant. So there was that very gentle line that we had to balance, to consider how do we invest in some areas whilst making savings in other areas. And just to say, one of the challenges was, how do we support those trailblazers? How do we really empower those people that have got passion and skills and knowledge to progress and to drive forward? And Rachel and Cheryl are two of those on the call, but there are now many, many more. How do we do that, but whilst also supporting those staff that perhaps aren't confident? And I think perhaps wrongly at the start, I was under the very stereotypical assumption that there was a correlation between age and ability. And of course, that's not the case. And we learned that very quickly. If anything, it's about approach and it's about mindset. It's not about whether you can use Google or Apple or Microsoft. It's none of that at all. It's about mindset. And part of the challenge I had was about, as I said, trying to do both of those things at the same time. Next slide, Rachel. And just wanted to give you sort of a bit of an overview of the process we went through in a just a quick manner. Was to say that we started with staff. We spent a lot of time empowering staff, getting staff on board, staff focus groups, staff CPD, and moved all of their operations to the cloud. And that was really important to me, because that we were never going to achieve anything unless we started with our staff and empowering them with the skills that they required to develop teaching and learning. Having spent a long time on that, I say we realised, we always knew, but it came to light very quickly that actually we had made some efficiencies, we'd streamlined some of the processes, we'd reduced workload, but we hadn't done huge amounts developing children's learning, and we hadn't worked massively on how are we using technology to provide greater opportunities for our children. And so with this came the formation of our technology for learning strategy that effectively runs through our wider teaching and learning strategy across the trust, and now our school improvement strategy, because technology for us is in our DNA now. It's part of our essential operations. And as a result of our kind of desire to provide the best quality learning experiences for all of our pupils, we are in the process of rolling out a one-to-one Chromebook program. So we're not going to talk massively about that. But I think in terms of when Rachel and Cheryl talk about the distance learning, the remote learning approach, I think it's important to say that actually our strategy was for every child to have a device in the future. And so when we procured devices and made sure that children got access to internet connections, had got access to a device, we weren't making necessarily any considerable change. What we were doing there was accelerating what we had already got planned. So this fitted in our wider sort of vision and remit for what we were trying to achieve. Next slide, Rachel. And the next slide, just to say that is sort of a summary of our journey, and that's not to say that it's the right journey or the only journey or indeed the correct journey. I think if I was going to go and do it again, I would make some changes. But what I'd be really interested in is just, how does this resonate with your journey? Is this similar to some of the challenges that you're facing? Can you sort of relate to our story? So I don't know if probably the best way is if people would like to contribute, if they put something in the chat, and then maybe Aziz or myself could sort of invite you in. Is that right, Aziz?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, and just to flag the chat function is in the top right of everyone's screen. There's a small text box. So if anyone would like to participate or contribute or thoughts throughout the presentation, then you can post through that chat function. Like I said, it's the top right-hand corner. I'll give people a couple of minutes, Graham, maybe just to think. I was just going to flag one question that we did that did come up quite consistently beforehand, was just about your approach with the kind of the youngest children, so early years, and I wonder what's been your experience of engaging, the youngest children in your online learning.
Yeah, so our vision is quite clear, that we want to make sure that the technology we use in classrooms is develops teaching and learning from nursery for us up to year 6, and for early years that was no different. We had to make sure that the offer that those children got was as good, if not better, than any other children. And we spent quite a lot of time working with the EYFS leads in each of our school. So we're really lucky that our EYFS leaders are a really experienced and passionate group of staff, and they're they're really knowledgeable. So we spent a lot of time working with them to look at how do we implement technology for these children at an appropriate level for them. So, for example, some sort of quick ways that we did it. We worked with them, and it came to light very, very quickly that the devices that we issued to our children in Key Stage 2 and top end of Key Stage 1 weren't suitable for those youngest learners. So the challenge for me was, how do we put technology in those classrooms that is suitable for those children, whilst fitting with our wider strategy. So, and I think one of the advantages, and this isn't sort of a Google sales pitch at all, but we went to Google, but one of the advantages for us about going to Google was that we could buy Chromebooks for our children, but we could also buy Chrome tablets for the children. So the devices that we were putting in front of children all sat within our strategy and fitted within how we wanted to deliver the 21st century teaching and learning, but they were also suitable for the children's kind of age and ability. And one of the things that's come to light in COVID-19, I won't say too much because I think Rachel or Cheryl might mention it, is but we've looked at our provision for Key Stage 2, and actually the feedback from our parents says, well, what are we going to do about early years? And so at the moment we're looking at a kind of cloud-based learning solution. So we're looking at an app called Seesaw, but there's lots out there. And because actually we don't want it to be a Key Stage 1 or 2 project, and actually there's a change management piece for us to do there about our youngest learners. And whilst we've done all that, I think it's still very much an area that we'd like to develop more over the coming days, at the moment, weeks, months, and years, really. So, Aziz, would you like me to take some of the questions from the chat? Is that?
Yes, sorry, yeah, I was just going to read. So I have a question
Perfect.
from Kate here, who said, how were you able to enable those children who do not have access to connections at home for learning or homework? So I guess, yeah, engaging, I guess, the most disadvantaged in terms of online learning.
Absolutely. We were in a really fortunate position that we started to plan our COVID-19 response quite early, and as the critical incident management team, that's right. We spent a lot of time talking about this, and for us it was really important there was equity for all, making sure that every pupil in our schools had access to this. And approximately a week before school closures, we shared with parents our plans, and we collected some initial data around device access and internet access. So, i.e., have they got a Chromebook, or have they got an iPad or a laptop or a MacBook or any of those sorts of tools? And also, have they got access to the internet? And there was 2 things that we did as a result of that. We procured USB dongles for every family that didn't have access to the internet. So when we closed, we could provide children not only with the food hamper that we were preparing on top of the voucher scheme, but we could also provide children with a device, and we could also provide children with a dongle for internet access. And I think, Kate, I agree wholeheartedly with you. It's really important, isn't it, that if this is the way we go, and if we use the internet to help deliver this teaching and learning, how do we support those? And so they have a dongle, they plug into their Chromebook. We put some restrictions on them. So things like YouTube and Minecraft and some of these games, unfortunately, don't work on the dongles because of some of the restrictions we put on. But we've also been realistic, and actually we've said, yes, we've produced some of this content, but we're also absolutely fine for a child to go on BBC Bite Size and do an online game to practice their number bonds to 10, for example. So we haven't necessarily policed it, but we've tried to control it. Equally with the devices, as a result of this data collection, we procured some devices on some considerable scale, and it meant that within you know, a very short period of time, we'd got board approval to go and purchase, and we could get those, and most importantly, get those out to children. And I think what was impressive about that was that we had the right stakeholders in the right meetings at the right time. So, for example, within 48 hours, we'd got prices in, we'd got a board approval, we'd purchased them, we sent the purchase order off, we'd collected them, they were in a child's hand within 48 hours. And I think that was part of our approach, was doing it early meant we had those options. And also those devices, we never intended to buy them, but that now means that year 6, when we return, can all be one-to-one across the board. So it wasn't necessarily a knee-jerk reaction, it was an acceleration of our one-to-one deployment program. Hopefully that answers your question, Kate. But please come do back in the chat if it doesn't, or if you've got any sort of further follow-up questions.
Just on that note, Graham, as well, again, one of the questions that was submitted beforehand, or you know, common theme, was around, you know, following up on Kate's point about engaging the most disadvantaged. What's been your experience of levels of engagement so far in terms of rolling out remote learning, and I guess if there's any tips around, you know, engaging those people that have maybe not been engaging as consistently as some of the other students?
Yeah, so I guess for us, there are kind of different ways that we've done that. So in terms of our approach to technology, because of the world we live in, because we're very data driven and numbers are very important to us as a society, and we've been able to track assignments on things like Google Classroom. And I don't really want to talk too technically, but it's effectively a workflow solution. So we put work on there and it sends it to different groups of children, and Rachel and Cheryl will come in and talk to you, I'm sure, more about Google Classroom and kind of why we chose that. But we use that as a tool because it gave us a very clear snapshot of pupil responses, and not necessarily just pupil response to inverted commas work, but also how they were engaging on the streams, talking to other children in their classes, how they were commenting on content we were sharing. So that was one way. In addition to that, from outside the technology perspective, our senior leaders in schools are managing communications and welfare checks with our most vulnerable children. So as part of that, that's one of the topics that senior leaders have been exploring with children, for those children where we're particularly concerned about or are particularly disadvantaged. And in schools, they're tracking through our kind of tracking spreadsheets about our engagement and what engagement we've had with each child. And so, for example, if we've seen a child in year 5 return a piece of work or provide us a video or have shared a YouTube video they produced or any of these things, then we're kind of collating that. So we've got a central picture of engagement with the school. And then from that, we can then use that to identify where the gaps are. And of course, you know, it's important to say that it's quite time consuming. But for us as an organisation, I think it's really important that we maintain those relationships. I'm sure Rachel will share with you, but one of the things that came through very, very quickly and very, very strongly was that children were missing that interaction with their staff. So now we've been holding meets a little bit like what we're doing at the moment with our children. And that was another way that we could take registers and we could ensure that we were trying to engage with as many children. And I don't have a class, so unfortunately I don't get to go to these, or maybe fortunately, I don't know whether I miss out or I don't miss out really. But I think it's really important that despite being a bit chaotic, that children do have that chance to see their teacher and have a chat, and maybe they're not necessarily learning focused, but actually that well-being and that welfare focus.
Brilliant, thank you, Graham. And I know we've had a comment from Lacey Cousins here saying that they've been using a very rapid journey to using G Suite, and that it's been really effective for them. And it would be really useful if anyone here as we go along is using a different platform to share their experiences of that, as well as I know that Google Classrooms is obviously a platform that Leo used, but there are kind of different different platforms out there. But yeah, brilliant. That's fantastic, Graham. I think unless anyone's got any other questions, that when you're ready, we can move on to the next section.
Super. So I'm just going to say thank you for listening. I really hope that was useful and there's something there that you can take away. I'm just going to pass over to Rachel, who's going to start to explore a bit more of the practicalities of what we did and what our remote learning, distance learning approach is looking like at the moment in the context of a constantly evolving world. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to go in now and just talk a little bit sort of about the journey that it's gone from. So just to sort of start with, you'll obviously see that this is a quote from Cheryl, who's on our call. But I think one of the important things to note about this is that, you know, whenever you introduce any piece of technology or any tools, that there's always going to be some kind of reluctance or sort of unsteadiness to take that on board. And I think sort of having teachers that are sort of leading on the ground and being able to share sort of their story of what it's been able to do for them. And, you know, anything that saves teachers time is always going to be a huge win. And I think if you can sort of find those small things that will save teachers time, it's always going to sort of be something that at least they might look into. Even if they're not sort of fully adopting that, then, you know, short little wins that save teachers time are always going to be appreciated by teachers. And, you know, that's ultimately where we're trying to drive that change from, because they're the ones that are working with it. They're the ones that are going to influence other teachers to start using it. So being able to sort of take that into consideration is really important as well. So sort of moving on to how we went from sort of our bigger digital strategy that we already have in place to obviously shifting to distance learning. And as Graham mentioned earlier, one of the key things was really thinking about what devices do our pupils at home have access to, and regardless of what device that they're using, and, you know, what platform you're using to support that, that ultimately it's the teachers that are sort of driving what happens with that technology. So, you know, it doesn't matter what technology you have, it's ultimately your teachers that are actually going to drive those lessons and that content and that inspiration for their learners as well. So ultimately, you know, you want to be able to put that power back in the staff and empower them to, you know, use that technology to drive that change as well. So one of the first things that we went about setting up was our distance learning site. And, you know, this was sort of going to be our main central hub for where all of our lessons, our recorded lessons, as well as the lesson content and resources would be uploaded to on a daily basis. And, you know, this was covering sort of just English and maths when the site started. But when we sort of got going, we soon realized that we needed to be able to offer up some more opportunities and some different lessons as well. And as well as some activities that weren't just focused on them being on their devices, but also taking some time away to engage, you know, outside as well. So having that opportunity to have all of this information on, and you'll see that all of the schools within the trust were all linked into the one site. So this made it really easy to be able to share the communication between, but also to sort of streamline the process of having those frequently asked questions when things weren't working. We also then included a live chat, which meant that if parents did have any questions or concerns or things weren't working for them, that they did have that communication channel with us. We also set up email groups so that work could be sent through, so that if pupils were deciding to do work at home, that we could actually keep track of that, as well as tweeting through things that they were working on as well. So it was really just to try and sort of engage parents, engage pupils, and continuing that learning process when they were at home. And this, our site's obviously evolved from when it first launched. And I think that's an important thing to remember, that, you know, nothing's going to be perfect when it's first released. It is that work in progress. And it is important to sort of refine and see what support needs to be offered there as well. And, you know, one of the sort of nice things was that our site was completely open. So we opened it up so that everyone around the world would still be able to have access to learning if their school wasn't providing that opportunity there. And you'll see here that our site, I know this was last week, so it could have updated by now, I'm sure, but our site has hit close to 30,000 users now. And I think that's a really nice thing to be able to see, that, you know, we have 3,500 pupils in our trust. So that's a lot of people that are actually accessing this content and continuing to learn from home, even though, you know, we are in a strange time. But I think it's just important to remember that, you know, what we offer, not just our pupils within our school, but those learning opportunities that we can continue to share with others as well. So just to talk a little bit in terms of sort of what that looked like in terms of a bit of pre-COVID and then obviously during distance learning. So in the classroom, you know, we were still using smart notebooks and we still had our, you know, projectors and touch screens, and we were still using exercise books. And whilst we were, you know, whilst we had our Chromebooks and we had, you know, some teachers using Google Classroom and Adobe and Jamboard, they definitely weren't being used heavily. You know, there was still a lot of smart notebook and exercise book work. But what we sort of did see was that huge shift to sort of adopting and using Google Classroom and Jamboard to be able to teach from. And teachers soon realised that actually they don't need Smart Notebook to be able to deliver their lessons. They can actually do this all through Jamboard. And because this works so nicely with our Chromebooks, this means that all of our pupils were still able to actually engage with that lesson. So in a similar way that maybe you'd use Smart Notebook and you'd have pupils come up to the front of the classroom and annotate and draw and write on the screen, this then meant that through Google Classroom, we were able to push out this same Jamboard to them, if you don't know what that is. But it's essentially sort of an online version of Smart Notebook that then allows people to sort of annotate, to add photos. So in a lesson context, this meant that teachers were able to put up the work that they wanted the pupils to access, and then they were able to actually go through and do all of their work and then have this so that the teacher can then go through and look at what they're doing. So this was a huge win for us, and I think it's helped us to sort of drive forward even further where we actually go when things all do return to some kind of normal, even though it is going to be a new normal. I think it's just important to remember that you know, you have to use what you've got, and that you do sort of just slowly making those small changes, small adjustments that allow teachers to have small wins, but also put that power back to those learners as well. So in terms of our distance learning, what this sort of started to look like was that we had learners initially that were sitting there and they were watching our video lessons, which was fantastic, and they were engaging and doing some really creative tasks. But this initially was just all on paper. So we were seeing lots of sort of paperwork that they were doing, which was a big sort of shift from what we had happening in the classroom, where the pupils were sort of using the Chromebooks to create and to demonstrate their learning. So we then sort of had to go back and reflect and think about the offerings that we were providing in terms of CPD for staff. And then sort of offer opportunities for them to see, okay, so you've been creating these fantastic video lessons. How do we now shift to actually get our learners on, and in terms of them using the device? So it's not just teacher using the technology, but also actually having them use it. So this sort of helped us to shift the way that we were doing things. So at the start, we had pupils very much just simply sending in photos of work, or tweeting it out, and this was across, you know, all of our subject areas as well. And then this was what we started to see once we'd sort of had some staff CPD, was that we were starting to see pupils sharing some more digital-based learning that they had done using some of our creative tools. And I think what was really nice about this was that this was something that was happening pre-COVID, and it was something that, you know, sort of when we went into sort of lockdown and doing that it then shifted to that sort of ownership of the teachers and not knowing sort of what tools or how they could actually get their pupils to apply what they were doing. And the pupils already knew how to use some of these tools already, and I think that was one of the big advantages for us in terms of our digital strategy. But we wanted to, you know, give them that power to sort of share what they were learning in lots of different ways. So, you know, things like using Google Earth to represent maps and to work out the area and perimeter of the school, as well as using Adobe Spark to retell stories. And just being able to sort of put things together in Google Sites as well. So we had lots of pupils that went away and started to actually put all of their information that they'd been researching and putting together into Google Sites as well. So this was just a really nice way to actually continue to see. And what was really nice is that this obviously then inspired a lot of other learners to continue to do that as well. So we started to see sort of a flow of more learners sharing their work digitally as well. And one of the sort of key things that we noticed when we were obviously just delivering these online lessons that were uploaded was that we'd sort of forgotten or sort of put to the side the wellbeing and connection aspect of our pupils. And I think that was one thing that was really important, that we made the shift to actually being able to sort of allow our pupils to actually meet with each other. And some of the ways that we did this was through class video conferencing, so using Google Meet in a similar way that we are now, where we had all of the pupils on within their class and being able to sort of sit there and share their stories, share what they were doing. A lot of the ones that sort of I would jump into just to sort of be there as a sort of helper at the start. They were having the children share sort of things that they'd created or made, or favorite toys, or going and doing sort of a treasure hunt and going and trying to find something. And I think this really sort of allowed them to be able to see their friends, to be able to see their teacher, and just to be able to check in as well. And I think this was really important for us because obviously we know that you know, our pupil wellbeing is so important. It's great, you know, that the learning process continues, but ultimately their wellbeing and their happiness is most important to us. And when we obviously started to feed back to them and ask for their feedback in terms of this whole process, one of the things that we noticed was that there was a lot of things that they were sad and disappointed that they were going to miss out on. So one of the first things that we did was we held a online disco, and this was 250 children dancing, singing, jumping about, talking to each other. Not quite a normal disco, but you know, for them, I think just that ability to be able to see each other in one space, to be able to dance along, to have that music in the background going, I think is so important. And it's these little opportunities that, you know, do help to keep them going during this time. So, because it is a very different time for them, and having that consistency as well, you know, the lessons, you can have that consistency and you can provide those timetables and the structure to the day, but there's nothing quite like these sort of unique experiences that really sort of allow that normal consistency when we think about a normal school day. It isn't just the learning that happens, it's also those connections that they have with their peers and with their teachers as well. So we did have teachers jumping on at the same time as well. So this was just a nice way to be able to do that. And then as well, in terms of sort of our approach, one of the things that we did need to shift was our CPD offering. And what we noticed was that initially we sort of had our traditional CPD approach, which was very much involved sort of the usual approach to CPD, where staff need to travel to sort of come to sort of the location of where you're having that after school meeting. And it's also that increased workload. So because they've obviously got pressure to be at a particular place at a specific time, then they are sort of always moving and sort of a rush to get things done. And then that travel aspect as well, you know, so teachers were losing time, and that was a hard part about it. And it was always that usual 4 o'clock meeting when staff are tired, staff are reluctant to take on board anything that you're sharing. They're usually still trying to process their day. And we've all been in those meetings and sat there at 4 o'clock thinking, I don't want to go through another one of these meetings. And you'll sit there, but you won't take any of it on. You'll walk out the door and you'll forget anything that you were taught during that. And also what we noticed was that the attendance was really low. So we were averaging only sort of 7 or 8 staff for these CPD opportunities that we were offering. And when we wanted to continue to offer staff CPD, was that obviously staff don't have to travel. They're traveling from maybe their sofa to the desk or to to their office in their house, but that's as far as they would have to travel. And just that very time, so we shuffled around and tried to offer some morning slots, some sort of lunchtime slots, some sort of afternoon and evenings as well. And because these sessions were recorded, it meant that staff could actually go back and rewatch sort of the whole thing, rewatch parts that maybe they missed or want to sort of go back over. So rather than, a traditional CPD where someone's standing at the front and delivering and maybe sort of a disengage for whatever reason or sort of can't remember something that was covered, they can actually go back and rewatch this. And we also noticed that we had huge number growth in our online CPD. So we were then averaging 30 to 175 on any of our online CPD training. And this has obviously made us shift in terms of the way that we then approach this moving forward. So not just that usual traditional CPD approach, but actually moving to sort of a more online or blended CPD as well. And then in terms of just what this looks like, this is just sort of some screenshots taken from the webinar. So we were obviously offering lots of different CPD to sort of encourage teachers to embrace various different tools. And I think this was really important that we had sessions that were tailored and then sort of some in particular focused on sort of assessment as well as pupil responses as well. And then, in terms of our child wellbeing, I spoke about that before in terms of having those video conferences and the disco for them and, various other activities that they've done. But one of the things that obviously is, is a huge aspect to that is that our staff are obviously working long hours, and I'm sure that you're all in that same position right now, that you'll notice that you'll have been working longer hours, possibly even on the weekends as well. And, one of the most important things is that our staff wellbeing is actually that we are checking in with them and that we are continuing to offer those similar experiences that we would have when we're in the school. And just being able to check in, have a laugh, see each other is really important. So holding sort of quiz nights and sort of just afternoon check-ins was always a key thing. And, just being able to sort of make sure that our staff that were continuing to teach were obviously going into those lessons and were sort of feeling happy and energized and ready as well. And this is sort of just to share that one of the other things that we obviously looked at was how do we continue our assemblies for our pupils. So I'm just going to play a little snippet of this now.
Good morning and welcome to Cheam Common Junior Academy's weekly assembly. Now, another week has passed, and first of all, just want to say once again, I've been completely blown away by the work that has been sent in on Twitter and on your year group learning websites. It has been really great to see everything that you've been up to. It definitely puts a smile on all of the teachers and my faces. So thank you, and please keep sending in anything that you're doing at home. It might be part of the work that's been set by the teachers on the distance learning website, but it might also be other things that you're doing at home with your families and with your siblings. It might be baking, it might be riding your bikes, it might be a game that you're playing. We'd really love to see what you're getting up to.
There we go. So one of the things that obviously sort of started from this is to have those connections, and to continue to allow that opportunity for the pupils to come together and to be there for that assembly. But obviously, the flip side of that as well is that, not all staff were confident in terms of being able to sort of record, and didn't like the idea of recording themselves to do an assembly online. But what we did see was that when this did go out, that this actually empowered those other teachers that maybe were feeling, oh, I'm not so sure about doing that, that they were actually empowered to sort of share and to continue to bring sort of everyone together in that aspect of an assembly as well. And then, on top of our usual sort of newsletters that went out, we continued to send out parent weekly newsletters, and this included often videos from staff. So staff would get together and create a little, we miss you style video to the children, but also it was a way to sort of continue to share what was happening, what we were doing, and any updates and activities as well. And then just to sort of finish up with, our, part of our story is that, during distance learning, our stats have obviously gone through the roof. We've definitely never had as many Google Meets before in the past, and we have seen, a huge uptake in terms of Google Classroom and the amount of files and things that have been created. But it is worth noting that, this is, across the whole trust as well. So across our 6 schools, and it hasn't been an easy process, but it is an important one. And I think what's really nice is that it does allow us to sort of drive change faster. So for schools that maybe were sort of hesitant to make anything and to change anything in the way that they were driving teaching and learning, that hopefully through everything that's going on, that actually it will drive change in schools now. So that sort of wraps that up, and we'll just sort of open up to some questions now. I know that there's been some coming through the chat already, but in terms of sort of what I've shared about our school's move to remote learning or distance learning, how does this contrast with your school? And then, what are the obstacles that your school has faced in delivering distance learning as well? So again, please feel free to use that chat to share any questions that you have.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Rachel. And yeah, a lot of detail in there, which is fantastic. We do have a question from Jan Latham. We want to start video meets with classes. What would be a good place to start with infant children? What would we need to bear in mind? This would help reassure staff. So I don't know if you did allude to those kind of classroom meets that you've been doing. I wonder if that's been possible with the youngest children.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the key things to sort of note is that, your communication with parents about having those Google Meets is really important as well. So being able to share sort of how it's going to work, how they need to log on, because, for a lot of them, it will be the parents that will be getting the children on to those Google Meets there. And sort of, if you have things, so we installed the extension Push to Talk, which just makes it that one step easier. So simply just tap on the space bar to mute and unmute. So for sort of younger learners, it is much easier to be able to do that. And yeah, so it is definitely possible, but just obviously go through and think about, how you're going to go about it in terms of if parents don't want their children's faces shown, then obviously giving them that option to turn off their cameras as well before they join, so they can still see everyone else, but their face isn't there, and that is definitely a concern for some of our parents.
Can I jump on and add to that as well?
Yeah.
With the meetings, so if you get so we made sure that we had two adults in each call every time. Obviously that's to cover staff safeguarding as well, but as well as that, we made the person that wasn't kind of the teacher, if we made sure that they set up the meet call, so they created the meet code using the calendar, it made it a lot easier for them to then control the call as well. So if there were children that didn't know how to mute their microphone, for example, the person that's not controlling the meet is able to mute the microphone, have control of the chat and stuff like that as well. So that is definitely a good piece of advice.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Yeah, and I wonder, Rachel, just a question that was submitted beforehand was just about the interactivity of the kind of lessons and yeah, whether you've been able to integrate that into your approach.
In terms of
so the interactivity of kind of teachers engaging with pupils in online learning, is that something that yeah, you've been able to make strides? Or is it very much one way from teachers to pupils?
So all of our lessons are recorded and uploaded onto that distance learning site that I shared earlier. And, you know, all of the resources are available there. But we also had our teachers that were sharing those same resources through Google Classroom. So what this meant was that any of our pupils that were going on and doing that through Google Classroom, the teachers could actually see that work that they were doing, and pupils could obviously go and ask their teachers questions within Google Classroom if that's what they were doing. But in terms of sort of, Cheryl, I don't know if you want to sort of elaborate on this a little bit more, but it was sort of more just there for, you know, that opportunity to continue the learning, but it wasn't, we didn't use our Google Meets for that.
Yeah, the Google Meets we just entirely use for wellbeing, really. We've done things like, what's it called? I forgot what it's called. Like getting them to go and find something, like little hunts and things, just having a chat about their week, maybe sharing something that they've done. Lots of children telling us that kind of they've been for bike rides and things, and just really promoting the outdoor learning as well. So yeah, the meetings that we have with the children are not kind of learning based, unless it's been something that we've kind of wanted them to do. So there's one our one this week we did. It was about talking about a competition that was available and the different ways that they could do that over half term if they wanted to. So yeah, and it was just a nice opportunity for them to ask questions and just see their friends really, and show us their dogs and cats and everything else as well. So something that we don't normally see as well. So that's great.
That's lovely, thank you. And I know that Jan had another question, which was just about the digital leads for Leo, who are presenting today, and whether they do also have teaching commitments alongside of that. I don't know if you could just say a couple of words on that, Rachel, at all.
So I don't. I'm completely out of the classroom, but I have only just joined the trust as well about 4 or 5 weeks ago now. So I'm very new. But Cheryl.
Yeah, so I have a full-time class at the moment. So yeah, I've been really on the journey with all the distance learning as well. So trying to balance kind of having the class and doing all the training for the staff as well. So yeah, and obviously I'm going to share some of that with you in a minute. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that leads us nicely on, Cheryl, to your section. I'll just give another kind of 30 seconds, minute, if anyone does have any more questions for Rachel's section, or maybe reflections on your own kind of journey to remote learning. But if not, yeah, I'll pass back over to you, Cheryl.
Great, thank you. So just to give you a bit of information about me, really, so just leading on from what Jan said, really. So at the moment, this year, I've been rolling out the one-to-one Chromebook programme across year 4 at my school. I'm the year 4 leader, and it's just, I wanted, this part of it is just to kind of give you a personal perspective of what's happened. And not just with the remote teaching, but also just generally with the rollout of the devices that we've used and the reflections as a teacher. So I wanted to start by kind of talking about how planning has changed. So I know that Graham and Rachel have mentioned briefly about kind of planning and preparation from the perspective of a teacher. But for me, I think the biggest thing, before any of the technology was rolled out, planning would often be one of those tasks where it was just quite long. You'd often spend a lot of time kind of communicating with teachers through emails, preparation. You'd spend hours at the printer, laminating, all of that things. Marking is also another thing that's obviously a lot of teachers find that quite a sort of a meaningful task sometimes, with sometimes very low kind of outcomes. So what does it look like now? Rachel, if you can just advance my slide, thank you. So with the technology, it's definitely given us more of a scope to kind of plan together, not just kind of in my school, but across the trust as well. So for example, while we've been on remote teaching, and again, just to kind of cross in with my technology role as well, I've been really lucky that there's actually another guy at one of the other schools that's been planning the maths kind of for me, so it's taken it off of my hands, but it's allowed us to kind of collaborate together. We've been able to meet like this during distance learning, but also all get on a document together and all be able to kind of work through at the same time. And obviously the fact that all of the work that we are planning for the children are on one central space, where anyone can access anytime from any device, doesn't matter where you are. It's massively cut down on photocopying, printing, laminating, and again, those quick wins that you can ask for teachers, even when you return to school, that is definitely one of them. And in terms of marking, I think we've established over distance learning that marking is still possible, and it's just a different way of approaching it. So the children will submit work to me. I'm able to leave them either a comment that I can generate in a comment bank, so I'm not regurgitating the same stuff to every child every time, but also we've been able to kind of record messages for children to attach to documents. So it's much more personalised than it probably was before. Rachel, next slide, please. In terms of other personalised learning, really, so thinking about differentiation, again, before the technology was a massive part of it, we probably would have generated differentiated worksheets. So you've got, you know, a child labelled as a high attaining child or a middle child or a low child. And usually the children know what level they are. They know that they're going to have that sheet every time. And sometimes that's never good for confidence. That's something that they really sort of struggle with. But I think now with the abilities that we have with the technology, it's much easier to kind of work with that personalised learning. Rachel, can you just press the next bit for me? Thank you. So in terms of submitting work, like we said earlier, we use Google Classroom, but even if I've created those differentiated worksheets still, I can allocate those sheets to those children that need them, and they are none the wiser that they've got a different sheet or a different set of work, because they are only allocated what I give them. So if I just put maths, it's their maths, and that's all they're concerned about. We've also we sort of bought into some apps that use intelligence technology as well. So these have been great because obviously they are pitched at the child's level. They give the children the opportunity to kind of almost show the program what they do know and what they don't know, and then the technology kind of kicks in and gives them work that is appropriate for them. So Doodle Maths was just a prime example. If you haven't heard of it, it is really good. And this was actually something that our digital leaders, we took some of our children to BET in London back in January, and they actually had the chance to kind of explore some of the apps that were available. And they actually chose this one. So it was very child student led. We began the trial at our school in year 4. And they almost had to sell it to our CEO about why they thought it was good. And this then led to us rolling it out across the other schools. That's our plan for kind of September. other things that we've kind of done over distance learning that we probably weren't doing before, but using something like Google Forms to actually create just one worksheet that will challenge children based on their response. So, for example, in a reading lesson, you might create a worksheet that has primarily just retrieval questions. If they're getting those questions wrong, then the next section of that, if it's saying that they're getting, it's automatically generating whether they're getting the answers right or wrong, and then they're able to then, you can either move the children on to sort of interpret questions, or it will just give them more retrieval questions that they need to practice. So we're not putting children in these boxes anymore. It's actually learning their behaviour and their responses and actually generating much, much better learning. Next slide, please, Rachel. Thank you. In terms of assessment, I think before, I'm sure you can appreciate that lots of assessment probably would have been lots of questioning within the classroom, hands up, hands down, thumbs up, thumbs down approach. You'd mark some children's work during the lesson, but the majority of it you might do after the lesson. The spelling test, almost you do the spelling test and then it would go straight into the mark book. And then you do end of unit tests to kind of assess children. Rachel, I'm not sure that slide's quite come up. Thank you, that's better. So how we've done this now is within our lessons, there are obviously lots of different ways using the technology that can help with that. So one example, and one that was very successful within my classroom, was Kahoot. If you haven't heard of it, so it's basically an online quiz where you can, there are loads that are already generated on there that you can already use, but there are lots, you can also create your own. And over the distance learning, Kahoot have been really good and have actually released their premium features to schools. But this actually allows them to be able to take the quiz in a really fun way. They love it in my classroom. It's always a really loud experience, but you know, they're really competitive and they want, you know, they want to get the right answer. They want to be the winner of the quiz. But not only that, but for my benefit at the end of it, it actually creates kind of results for me that can then help me move on with the learning. So if there was a child that was constantly getting something wrong, Kahoot almost tells me you need to work with this child because they don't understand this part. And the same with Nearpod. If you've not heard of Nearpod, again, another kind of, you can integrate Nearpod within slides. So when you're creating presentations for children and lessons, you can create these kind of online in the moment polls where you can be like, well, what do you think of this? And again, it just almost gives me that information. And again, Nearpod have also offered kind of a student paced mode that assists with distance learning, where the children again can do the work through the slides at their own pace, and at the end it will generate something for you. It will generate, you can kind of see what children are going to need that targeted support. And then the final one in this kind of area was the spelling test. Now we know that, and I know from experience that, you know, typically you do the spelling test, it goes straight in your mark book, probably never to be seen again, or to raise a parents' evening when you know that you want children to sort of learn spellings more. But actually, we've actually put our spelling tests onto Google Forms. So what we've done is we type the sentence, we leave the missing word out. When we test the children, we'll read it out in the same way that we would in a normal spelling test situation. But what the analysis that you get from it is so much better in the sense that afterwards you can actually see where the errors are. So you can see what errors children are making, and then you can then use that in your next spelling lesson, maybe as a starter, or, you know, it might just be something that you want to address. But that is another really good way that we've definitely adopted that just works so well. It just gives you so much more than what you would get typically. Next slide, please, Rachel. In terms of spelling lessons, while we're on the subject of spelling, so again, a typical spelling lesson in our school before probably would have been lots of me talking, children interacting maybe with whiteboards and pens. Again, always a struggle trying to get children to find whiteboards and pens in a typical primary school where pens don't work and, you know, it's just a nightmare. Some of the children would be disengaged, not always wanting to kind of take part. And then typically at the end, you probably got some sort of summative kind of worksheet for them to complete. Whereas now, if we look at how we've done it over distance learning, and probably prior to that slightly, was that spelling lessons can now be done online in real time. We've actually used something called Jamboard. Again, if you haven't looked into it, definitely do. Kind of the the sort of interactive version of Smart Notebook, as I like to put it. But it also means that children can collaborate on it at the same time. So if you were using it in a classroom, you can have multiple children working on one Jamboard at the same time. But obviously in distance learning, that's not always possible. But actually, it's just a case of them being able to manipulate on a screen and still be able to achieve the same things that they would in the lesson. Next slide, please. So writing lessons. So again, these have massively changed, either prior to distance learning, but also during distance learning. So this is one example that we did during distance learning. So last year when we did this would have been what would have happened in the classroom, write an application to become a secret agent. You might have found that we would have done some role play with the children. There would have been some children that wouldn't have wanted to take part. They would have taken that kind of role at the end where they just sort of come in at the end. Whereas with this, there is absolutely no way that any of the children can kind of not do this. So we know that children nowadays are really interested in YouTube and becoming YouTubers. And if you ask children, YouTubers are probably one of the most common answers of what they want to do when they're older. So why not enhance that into the classroom? So this particular video that I'm going to show you is we changed it to write an application but hold an interview to explain why you would become an exceptional secret agent. And we've used something called Flipgrid, which is a free website that you can sign up to. And this child in particular is one of those children that I just talked about. He's a very reluctant child. He's not a very good reader, so he finds it difficult to read. Even if he's written something good, he would find it difficult to read back. But I'm just going to play the video and then I'll discuss it afterwards.
Dear Director of the Global Dear Director of the Global Protection Force, I am writing to you because I am an extremely passionate person and very, very responsible to do this job. Being a secret agent is my dream because most of my family have worked for this amazing force before. Firstly, I am extremely good at adapting to new environment.
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of say, but the ability that he's had with this piece of tech has just been amazing. He's able to start and stop it so that his confidence level, you know, when he's not confident, he can pause it. He can then record it again when he's ready. And you can see there was a parent kind of helping him in the background there. But I think we found that lots of the children, some of the children do it in one take. Some of the children do it in one take and then redo it again afterwards. But for this child in particular, that was so beneficial and is so much more than what he would have got in the classroom. He would have been one of those children that would have just had that step back. Thank you, Rachel. Next slide. And then another one here is science lessons. So what would it have looked like before? So typically you would have asked the children to do some research. Maybe you would have had lots of books. They would have worked together. They probably would have given one device to work with and kind of making some sort of poster or presentation to then present to the class. But now we've actually managed to train our children. And to be honest, it didn't take very much training to actually be able to create a Google site, to be able to do this. And also during distance learning, some of the children have been absolutely amazing at even just trying to get another child to collaborate with them. So we found that they weren't doing this entirely independently either. They were chatting through our classroom saying, oh, does anybody want to work with me today on the science project? And some of them did produce some actually collaborative stuff from home too. So that was amazing. This is one example of the digestive system that we created together. This was when we were back in school. But what we did was with this particular one, we had multiple children responsible for different pages in it. So I set up the site in general. I created all the sub pages. And then I gave each group a page to focus on. And then at the end of it, you've then got this whole class collaborative project. And there's definitely no reason that you couldn't do that from home as well. So there's one example. I know that some of the questions prior to the meeting today was about kind of accessibility and inclusion for children that are finding kind of find learning difficult anyway, but let alone during distance learning. But just a couple of things that we've used that might be beneficial is obviously Google Translate is a really good one. The children are able to translate any piece of work into their own language, making resources that are kind of bilingual as well. So able to do that. The other one is an app called Read Write, which is an add-on to any Google product. And this means that this will actually read text to the children. And we've also used it in general for all of our children to actually read to us. So although we could use Flipgrid for that, which we have done a few times, but Read and Write is actually really good for recording as well. So we give the children a piece of text and the child can actually just record themselves reading and send it directly to you. So that was another really good one. Obviously, voice recognition is another good one. But lots of different ways that children that are often the ones that really struggle have been able to access some of the learning from home. Next slide, please, Rachel. And then I just wanted to show you one example about how children have been collaborating beyond our classroom. And I think this one's probably this resonates with me the most, really, because even now, while I've been on this call, my class are talking to each other. And I know that I don't have to be at the computer waiting to respond to the email, because I know that there'll be somebody else in the class that will be able to help someone that's having trouble. And this is really beneficial. And we found that even before distance learning, this was great for even stuff like homework as well, where we were posting online and children were finding it difficult. They're able to talk to one another about it. So there's one example here where the child's saying, I'm stuck. And then another child sort of saying, oh, well, you know, this part, you can, you know, this is what you do. And then they've sort of said thank you to one another. You can see on the one on the right hand side, the child's actually posted something that she's particularly proud of, an Adobe presentation that she's made. She's had some real positive encouragement from her peers, not just me, during the time. But also some of the children have actually responded to that and said, oh, did you know that, did you know that this has started and this is another thing that I can offer to your presentation? And I think that's just been absolutely amazing over distance learning. Next slide, please. And then this child, so we passed over to the children, and again, this is another Flipgrid video about how does technology help you? Because again, there's no one better to explain it than a child. So I'm going to pass you over to this child that's going to explain it to you.
Technology is helping me learn because it grows my confidence and independence. It is also helping me learn because I get to do things more on my own with less guidance. It also helps my typing skills.
And I think there she kind of summarised it really nicely, which is why I chose it for this presentation. But the main things that she's kind of addressed there are it's promoted confidence, her engagement is higher, she's more independent than she would have been before. And also it's just, it's giving her the skills that she needs for the future as well. Which what can we ask? We can't ask for any more there, really, can we? So, and then the last slide, I'm just going to quickly run by you. And this was one that I wanted to kind of show you. Next slide, please, Rachel. Thank you. Was kind of the confidence in the use of technology, because obviously I think one of the reasons that I'm in the job that I'm in today, if you'd have asked me this 3-4 years ago, I would have been at that stage one, where I'm just survival. I'm scared of breaking it. I don't know kind of what to do. I don't know how to use it. I just don't know. But I think being given the opportunity within my school to be able to just explore it and have a go. And I think that's been a key thing that Leo have offered for all staff. It's just that kind of that freedom to kind of just give it a go and see. And I think one of the other things that's been really good from our distance learning point of view is that we've offered the training, but then we've offered the opportunity for them to just go and try it with their classes. And I think we were in a really good place where some of the year groups were using kind of technology already. So some of the staff had already seen the benefits of it, but there were some staff that hadn't. And I think now we're sort of moving in our journey of the impact and the innovation, but that is only due to the fact that we've been offered that chance by our senior leaders. And that's the end of my presentation there, really. So my question to you now is kind of what's been your personal experience of remote teaching? Just like to pop it in the chat. If there are any questions as well, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Cheryl. That was, like I said, really detailed as well, and really interesting. Just to go through, Kate's posted a comment about the time that it's taking to complete tasks, and there's a concern that, or there's a concern, how do you manage that for in-house learning?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually, and I think we battled a little bit with writing to start with, because I think we were trying to get them to write the same. I mean, I teach year 4, and my expectation is that a piece of writing in class, normally half an hour, a page is probably acceptable, isn't it? But we were finding the same thing, really. We were finding that children were almost either just writing very, very short pieces of work. And I think our focus went more to kind of grammar and shorter tasks, where children can really just kind of consolidate what they've been doing in class. And actually, the smaller the task, the more, you know, we'd rather it was a small piece of task with a better outcome than a big piece of task with no outcome. So I think that's definitely another piece of advice for writing.
Well, thank you so much, Cheryl. If we leave the chat open for the moment, and if people have any questions that they would like to ask, or reflections that they'd like to share with us, then then please do continue to do that. If I'd just like to wrap up, if that's okay. And I believe if Rachel, if you could skip the slides along. And just to touch on, just to give a little bit more information about what Challenge Partners are doing at the moment to support schools, and just to flag that on our website, we've collated a kind of fantastic array of kind of online resources, and particularly we've got some really good webinars from partner schools as well as professionals from outside of education. So there is a kind of wealth of knowledge on there. And sorry, Rachel, if I could get you to just skip ahead one slide, please. We're also, this is the first of a kind of a collection of virtual leadership development presentations that we're doing. And we're looking to kind of make them targeted to, you know, kind of current issues that schools are facing. So we've got one the second week after half term that's looking about supporting young people and children who have experienced trauma. And that's going to be publicised on our website. So please do keep an eye out for any future events that we're hosting. We've also got, we're kind of collating feedback from our partner schools and sharing that with the DfE and the government where possible. So please do kind of continue to share your feedback with us as an organisation, and any kind of support needs that you do have. And we are also looking ahead to the next academic year. We've delayed the start of our partnership year to September. And as such, we're currently in the position of encouraging our partners to renew that were previously members, and also looking to induct new schools and things as well. So there's more information again about that on our website, but please do contact me directly if you'd like to speak about the Network of Excellence in any more detail. Lastly, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Graham, Rachel and Cheryl for conducting this presentation. It's been really useful, and hopefully all the attendees here have found it really useful as well. I'd just like to say a special mention to Melinda Young as well, who's the hub manager for the South West London hub, and who's been able to help facilitate this session. And also a huge thank you to Phil Hedger as well, who's the senior partner for the hub, but also the MAT CEO, who's incredibly generous with his time and resources, and really embodying the spirit of challenging collaboration. So thank you all very much.